I think I've messed it up here. All right, guys. Well, hello, Ralph. And at the last minute, as always, I'm trying to adjust things. Today is, okay, we'll leave that one off and I'll sort that one out later there with our, with the comments coming in. Welcome today, everybody. This is a special Immigration Nation episode. And I am extremely pleased to have with me my good friend, Will Tao. How are you, Will?
Good. I'm excited that your Chinook correspondent is back in the house.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome today. We're doing cash. We're doing the mic setup here, so you guys will actually be able to hear me probably a little bit better than you normally do. And yeah, I'm super excited to have Will come back and share some more insight on the Chinook system, which is all about how your visa refusal is now getting generated, essentially. And so we call it catching the Chinook. It's kind of a little bit of play on words. So, Will, what's a Chinook? There's two things. I'm going to give you my Chinook, and then you give me your Chinook.
I think we talked about this last episode, but Chinook for me is it's salmon fishing in Campbell River in the late fall. That's my Chinook. Maybe the helicopter as well when I see it on the TV, the Chinook helicopters, but the Chinook wind, that's your Chinook.
That's my Chinook, the Chinook wind. But I like yours. It fits because, holy cow, this Chinook thing is like this elusive fish and you just can't find the right bait. And, you know, trying to understand what it is, how it works. You've been working hard to get that intel, like really hard.
Yeah.
And immigration, that like the department's doing everything they can to, you know, to not open the curtain and let you see what's going on behind the curtain.
We've been hearing that our name has been dropped in a few consultations recently with government. You know what? We're trying to do so for the applicants, and you know I represent several clients from high refusal countries whose cases are going to be caught by the Chinook. So I believe as an advocate for them, it's my responsibility to speak to more transparency and fairness in the system, in hopes that they will have their opportunity and their hope of coming to Canada, which this system could take away a lot of those fundamental opportunities.
Now, this is version 2. So this is round 2. We've kind of evolved. So maybe you could just take a second just to get some of our new listeners caught up to what this is, the Chinook system.
Yeah. So just as a quick sum, Chinook is an Excel-based system that essentially bulk processes and sorts and allows officers to streamline the processing of applications. It's not being used universally around all visa offices, and its primary use is in high volume, high refusal visa offices. So we know the ones such as Delhi, such as Ankara, such as the ones in Africa, such as the ones in China. And I guess the concerns that advocates like myself are raising are, you know, how do we ensure that the system has proper oversight to ensure it doesn't discriminate?
Yeah. And I'll just flip my screen over here so that those who are watching can see here. I got a pretty good screenshot there. Basically, if you go back and you watch the previous episode of Immigration Nation, this one was released on August the 20th. Will, yeah, your hair's growing, man. Your hair's growing. I'm rocking the glasses today a little. Well, nice. I had a little bit of scrag back then too, but this is all about a kind of an intro that kind of set things up for us today. And now we're just evolving to 2.0. And so if you want to go back and watch that video, I highly encourage you to do that because Will does go into a lot more depth as to how the system works. And obviously you've learned quite a bit from there as well about the system.
Absolutely. Initially, it was, you know, through an affidavit in a court case called Okrin, so still pending decision. But now the access to information requests, and this is what happens usually when immigration lawyers and professionals and researchers and media find out these keywords. It's like, hey, we got to dig deeper. So we've done, I believe, probably hundreds of ATIP requests collectively on what Chinook is, and now we have manuals that officers train with to teach them what Chinook is. So we know much, much more. And unsurprisingly, the stuff from the court case was one picture they were trying to paint, whereas it's a much bigger behind the scenes picture of what's going on.
Excellent. All right. So, so today, where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's actually, you know what? Let's start with my tweets. I think they're interesting
Okay.
for especially the chain, because I think it gives you the first image into what maybe the other one first. This is, we can
Sure.
talk about this second, because this is good for practitioners and those who are applying themselves. But I think the initial part I want to start with was the where Chinook is being focused. And in the court case of Chinook, they really focused in on this hypothetical of someone from Ottawa who was an Ottawa resident who was a Canadian citizen going through Chinook. So they created this kind of hypothetical that didn't quite make sense. But in the training manuals, you start seeing the real application of Chinook, because this is what they're training their officers on. Obviously, not your Canadian from Ottawa who doesn't need to immigrate. So when you go to the mock-up and you see it in a little bit closer, I don't know if we can get in a little bit more on that. This is what the Chinook window looks like, and this is an exclusive. I haven't talked about this yet, other than writing a bit about it. So I want everyone who's listening to kind of look closely at what this means when your application is reduced. Thank you, thank you. Reduced, I would say, to these columns, right? The application number, group number, working notes, actions, when it was received, your gender, your age. I think there's also one that has marital status a little bit over, and your purpose of visit. So the officers are using this tool and are able to sort. And I initially we were thinking hundreds, but they've said in their stats thousands at a time applications to make quick decisions. And one of the things that comes to mind, and I don't know if you've been part of a hiring process. I mean, no, I know you've been part of hiring processes, but
Hmm.
if it's a Canadian company that you represent, or if it's your own hiring processes, this idea of sorting through the door, who you want
Yep.
to interview, who you want to, in this case, come to Canada. It gives this opportunity really for an officer to say, hey, listen, because of your age, because of your
Yep.
marital status, because of your country of citizenship, to filter those. And they have all the tools to help them support that, including historical data. So the fact that, 80% of the folks from this country have been refused over the past, or 80% of those who are, uh, you know, not married or
Yep.
single, or above the age of 40 or 50 or
Exactly. I
whatever it
was
might
going to
be.
say, Will, I was going to say, okay, you've got a gap in education. It's been 10 years since you've been out of school. You're over 30 years old.
Mm,
My personal favorite, you've never traveled before. Like
yeah.
all of these factors, just instantly, oh, you're on this hit list. Therefore, you're in the likely to refuse column. Huge concern.
Absolutely. And they can do so by organizing it together. So an officer can put all their applications that they're assigned, up to thousands, and say, hey, today I want to deal with all the applications of folks that are 60 plus. I mean, presumably the system allows for that. Or today I'm going to work on all the applications from this country, not this country. And when you're looking at like applications, you're probably going to render similar type refusals. And that's why, again, going to our whole idea of the refusals not reflecting the evidence or the letters of explanation or the submissions, why we're coming up in this sort of crisis of cases needing to go to federal court for judicial review, or ways that we have to reapply and challenge unreasonable decisions.
Excellent. And it's interesting when you talk about federal court, which is often the direction we go, and we are not appreciating the quality of the refusal. Not that we like any refusals, but when we have questions about procedural fairness and everything else associated with it, we're hearing a lot from the courts. They're overrun. They have not
Mm-hmm.
been filling. They have not been replacing judges that are retiring. They have not been adding in a corresponding number of federal court judges to deal with the increasing volumes that are coming. And so,
Yeah.
this is just my own thought process. I don't do a lot of federal court work, but I'll tell you, we're seeing a lot of consents, lots of
Mm-hmm.
consents
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
DOJ. And so
Very
if
early on.
for all of our colleagues out there, if you've got a client that's willing to go forward, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to go to court. And even in
Yeah.
discussions, I have to be careful a little bit because obviously I'm involved with the Canadian Bar
Mm-hmm.
Association and stuff. And all these comments are all mine. So unrelated completely to
Mm-hmm.
that. I want to make sure that everyone knows this is just Mark Holt, the immigration lawyer, talking here. But yeah, the government's very strategic in what they do. right? There's a
Yeah.
reason that they
Yeah.
let this one go through, right?
Yeah,
The
and we
Ocran
actually
case. Yeah.
we found an ATIP where they essentially said as much. They said,
I read it.
find the
Hmm.
strategic cases. Yeah, you read it too. Find those
Hmm.
cases so we can
Yep.
bring a system like this forward. And
Yep.
it kind of contradicted with what was in the litigation. But I think the bigger problem is this: if we think about it from a access to justice perspective, which I like to think and mold my practice around, if these cases are going to consent and clearly are generated by Chinook, why do we have to drag these clients through court? And the court fees, I mean, the actual application fee is $50, but any lawyer who's authorized to practice will tell you it's extremely time consuming, and it's an expensive part of our practice. The amount of funds that this takes, I believe, isn't justifiable for many folks, and it isn't frankly accessible for many folks, even if they are international students, but let alone if they're trying to come visit a family member or so forth. So I think to create this as a second knock almost that you have to do to get an officer to properly read the file is itself very problematic. And there must be a better way of doing this, or at least some oversight if this is the future.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I was going to try, Will, to bring a few people on here, but I managed to mess up my little thing here. Let's see if I
It's
can bring
okay. The
this
color's a
down
little
to
different. Okay, my
my
sister decided
comments. Yeah, just give me a second. I'm going to adjust this so that people that are posting comments, let's just add in a background. I think this should work. Just give me a second. I'm
Oh yeah.
okay.
There
I
you go.
think that will. It's not beautiful, but it'll work. So
Mhm.
yeah. So there's, these are the comments that we're getting here. I'm going to try to
Yeah.
expand this one out a little bit more. It looks like that is as far as I'm going to get. So yeah, we get a lot of these,
Yeah.
sister's visa got refused. I was inviting her to Canada for my convocation.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
like tons like this. Let's just see
Yeah.
here. Yeah. And those of you who are watching this live, I think, this is pretty technical stuff, but as you're paying attention, you're listening to what Will says, this can actually help and guide you in
Mm-hmm.
understanding what's happening on the other side. And when you
Yeah.
understand how an officer approaches your application and how they, how they are able to interpret the information that you've provided, you can better prepare yourself. So what you're giving to them is giving you a better shot at approval. And that is by
Yeah.
far one of the most important aspects of what we're doing today.
Mark, actually, this is a good segue into maybe that second document I sent you, because this
Mhm.
actually, I think everyone, if there's one takeaway from today, I know I have an academic interest in Chinook and the bigger policy issues. For many of you, it's like, how do you resolve or do better applications or reapply stronger the next time? Well, Module 2 of Chinook is the pre-assessment module. It's not utilized by all visa officers, but it's presumably where they will get the pre-assessment officers, largely locally engaged staff at the different visa officers, at the different visa offices to set up the file for a decision by the officer. And look at this. I think this is incredible, Mark. This
Yeah.
is essentially the guy. The rest of the document is redacted, so we don't have any of the specifics. I wish this is probably number one on my I wish I had in my hands
Well, maybe you
document
can
in immigration.
explain to everyone what you mean by redacted and how you
Oh
requested this. Most people know, but just
yes,
go through the process. And this is what's
this is
happened.
interesting. Yeah, so it's a process called access to information, where because these documents, they are subject to review, subject to what's called redactions, documents that they cannot share with us, or portions they cannot share with us because it's injurious to national security, or it's subject to litigation, or some other. There are many lists of reasons why they do not provide the documents, but these are documents such as training guides and manuals that are available, and you have to pay money and request it. And of course, with ATIPs, you have to have, be in Canada for that particular process, or originate from Canada for the request. But that's what we're getting back from these type of requests. This is actually from a colleague, Cobus Crick in Maple Ridge, a wonderful consultant that
The
does a
master
lot of good
of
work.
ATIP. Yeah.
Master of ATIP, one of the masters of ATIP, along with Richard
Mhm.
Kurland
Richard
and
Carlin.
Mario
Yeah.
and a bunch of
Yeah.
folks. But he shared this manual with us, and essentially is the training manual for the officers when they're pre-assessing, the pre-assessment officers when they're pre-assessing a file. And just look from the starting point. Who is the applicant? Immigration status and country of residence. I don't know about you, Mark, but for me, immigration status and country of residence, we addressed it, but would I say it was our number one submission? Probably not. It would probably be somewhere a little bit later down the list, right? Same with travel history. The courts have said no visa, no travel, no travel, no visa. It's a neutral factor. Well, it's second on their list of who is the applicant.
Yeah.
Then it's the
And I'll
purpose
jump
of
in here,
visit.
Will. So
Yeah.
just so people understand immigration status and country of residence, normally people would think, well, who cares? Well, there's a
Mhm.
lot of countries, and this is something that we see a lot of. You're coming from Saudi Arabia, the UAE,
Mhm.
and we
Mhm.
know that it's not like Canada where you can become a permanent resident and you've got all the rights and privileges of a citizen except the right to vote. In those countries, it's tied to work, even though you're a permanent resident. And so the question becomes, all right, you're coming from Dubai, you're coming to study or work. Your family's actually been living there for 30 years, but yet you have no specific status. And in many
Mhm.
cases, if you're there on your own working, then where are the ties? Which country are you going to go return to if you are
Mhm.
abiding by the temporary conditions that are associated with that study permit or work permit? And
Mhm.
this is a significant factor that we've seen the officers use when they're assessing individuals from countries where they don't have a status when they're not in their country of
Yeah.
citizenship. So
Mhm. That's a really, really good summary, Mark. But and also I think for applicants, they often don't, when they have multiple citizenships, or they have access to a country they may be stateless in, they aren't really drawing the return plans to various options, right? And it's much more complicated now in this new global world. Folks hold third passports from Barbados
yeah,
possibly, or they're going to go back
yeah,
to some other country they have access to, but they'll lose their possible status unless they return every 6 months. But those are things that should be addressed in applications, and as this
yeah,
training sort of manual shows, it's top of the list in the officer's concerns, right?
yeah,
And again, similar with purpose of visit, which is a common refusal ground, it's probably the one that gives the most sort of broadest options. Why are you studying now? Why are you visiting now? Who are you visiting? But then family in Canada, how are you addressing that you have family members in Canada? There's a financial blocks about all the finances. I don't know about you, Mark, but I'm seeing a lot more financial refusals recently.
yeah,
They spelled financial wrong in this manual, but still,
yeah.
there's a lot of financial
You bet.
refusals now because they're saying, "Hey, where's the money coming from? Is it accessible?" Things that are not even on the website or in the guidance that are
Yes.
creeping into refusals.
I'll point something out as well, Will. I'm just going to go back to the main channel here for my YouTube, and I'll close this up. One of the videos that I did, and I'll just go to the whole big list here. One of the videos I did was back about a month ago when we finally started to see some forward movement in India. It's this black one here, and
Hmm.
so I had someone reach out to me who was in the U.S. and they had a dependent in India, and finally
Hmm.
we were starting to see some movement. And
Hmm.
I found something extremely interesting, and that's part of the reason why I've got this highlighted. This is the actual passport request letter, and never before had I seen them request updates on the settlement funds in the context of
Hmm.
a PPR. But in this
Hmm.
world with the pandemic, people losing jobs, many
Hmm.
PRs actually eating up their settlement funds before they're finally able to come. This is an issue. So it does
Yep.
not surprise me at all that now they're saying, okay, well, we really want you to, prove that you really have this money. We're not going to give you any benefit of the doubt. And so that was
Hmm.
something that I found really, really interesting. That was an evolution. That's a direct, a
Yeah.
direct response to the pandemic and the global
Yeah.
problems economically people are having.
And it creates a lot of challenges because the reality is in some countries the currency is not worth very much. That people are paid $500 a year as their yearly salary. They have to have money in offshore accounts. But then immigration is going to ask where are the funds from? How did you accumulate these? Are they actually yours? If you borrowed them, who are they borrowed from? And then a lot of times, like when you go to court, they'll say, "Hey, listen, the officer failed to consider the relationship or the possibility or didn't expand on those." But we can't just do things for federal court. I mean, obviously, we want to as a sort of security and safety net, but you have to convince the officers at the
Yeah.
front end, right, to avoid this whole back end process. So it's really good to pay more attention to that in applications for sure, and see that as a reason. And definitely, I think the 5.4 and down, the study permit and work permit specific blocks. I mean, previous education, letter of acceptance details, the language tests, financial items, first and second programs, the details of
Yeah.
LMIAs. I'm starting to see more work permit refusals, even where LMIAs are there, because they have concerns about the genuineness of the job offer or the employment history. it goes back to the forms. A lot of
Yeah.
folks don't spend enough time on good application and immigration forms. I think I talked about that on the last episode, but still the starting point for any really, really effective application.
Yeah, absolutely. First program, second program. Why do you care? Well, because if you did crappy in school in those programs, they're going to say, well, are you academically capable of succeeding when you come to Canada and go to school? Right? It's like they look at a whole bunch of things that people just don't appreciate. And the biggest thing to point out here, Will, is that how much of this stuff are you seeing on the document checklist? Right?
No,
How
not
many of these
very
things are
little.
they specifically telling applicants, hey, we're going to be looking at all of these things. And so
No.
here's a checklist of how we want you to address this so we can properly assess your application. Heck no, here's a bare bone list of the very minimum stuff that we need. Then we'll make the decision on whether or not we want you to,
Yeah.
get approved for the study permit or work permit.
Yeah. And for temporary residents especially, and again, going back to Chinook and the global movement, I mean, the reason why you have, 50, 60-year-olds from certain countries wanting to come study in Canada is because our pathways to permanent residency or even our other access trade agreements or LMIAs or work permits don't exist for many of these folks, right? So for them, their only way that they see, and probably reasonably the only way, is to come and study at an institution. But then again, with your profile, if you're at a certain age, you've taken a huge gap, or you've already have a higher PhD and you're trying to do a postgraduate and diploma at some no-name college, it's going to be very difficult. And I think more and more we have to ask our questions about why this. Is there a better way to do it? Should we have quotas? Should we have other things that? I mean, I don't know. It's an open question for discussion.
Yep, it is.
Good question.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm just going to try to adjust this back. I'm trying to get this sorted out here. So here's, and yeah, while you're looking at that one, I'm just going to adjust it just a little bit more.
All right.
Kind of doing it on the fly.
I can take a first crack at Eduardo's question about seeing many generic ATIPs for student permit refusals in Brazil. Could it be because of Chinook? Yes, the whole idea of the generic. So what happens, and just to summarize, when there's a refusal letter, that itself is already automatically generated, which we know. But more and more now we're seeing in the ATIPs, the use of generic language with very, very little actual fact analysis, or even more than a sentence being, related to the actual client's case. And that is Chinook as well, because what they're doing is when they generate the refusals, they decide to refuse a client, it shows up on this officer's screen. Here are your options to refuse the client. Here's what you click, and here's how you expand on those reasons. And those are automatically put into the ATIPs. And that's what we have when we try and do a new application or go to court to say, hey, there's not much there. And that's why the courts aren't happy when they see these cases and they settle so much, as Mark was mentioning, because there's actually no factual analysis, and they can be copy and pasted to hundreds of different folks in similar situations. Again, that's what Chinook is trying to do. Mass bulk process applicants in a similar setting and with similar characteristics.
And for us, when we're challenging these decisions, a lack of notes is an important, it's a really tough situation for us, because it's hard for us to challenge even when we don't have all of the decision making that's going on by an officer, and we can't trace how they're coming to the conclusions that they are. Now, interestingly, and I know you're probably going to talk about this, Will, these sticky notes, right, that the officers use.
Working notes, yeah.
The working notes that they've said, yeah, they're there, but no, there's nothing substantive really in them. They're just to kind of like placeholders to kind of categorize their thoughts, and, but there's nothing really substantive in there. And I think we're not buying it. And, I had I think of the way I worked on the border as an officer, border officer, and we'd have people come in, and this is the old days of FOSS. And, we would enter, NCBs, which basically notes in the old FOSS system to let another officer know kind of what happened when this person came, in case they were report shopping or going around, or just to add to their history. And, I can tell you that the notes in there, the expectation was that you would clearly, especially if you're issuing a 44 report or something like that, the explanation and how you arrived at the decision you made, it was a requirement that we put details in there. But now with the cut and paste and the summaries and everything, all of that infrastructure, if you will, that's leading up to the ultimate decision, it's just been gutted. It's like
Hmm.
A, therefore B, right? And that's it.
Exactly.
Nothing in between.
I mean, there's a whole discussion, and I think immigration's pushback is it's not artificial intelligence, and there isn't a machine making the final decision, and it's presented to an officer. But how the automations and how it all the algorithms and the automate, especially the automated parts where you click one thing and the rest of things fill in, that is all still very relevant, I believe. To and once you do introduce the type of AI you're seeing, you have you could possibly in India and China, for example, these TRV applications, you have systems that are making that front end, feeding into a back end that doesn't really display much information and give officer very much leeway. If I'm seeing a 70-year-old from this country coming for a family visit and that's all I know about them, I'm probably going to refuse them. I mean, I'm,
Yep.
I'm just speaking from like even a practitioner perspective.
Yep.
But if I read a compelling letter or know more about your story or
Hmm.
why you got to come here and all those
Yep.
things, that makes a huge difference. And I just don't know where that space is in the system anymore or
Well, even
moving forward.
counsel submission, right? Well, if we're
Exactly.
representing these clients, where's the information that we're putting in there to tell that story, to give the context, right? And
Yeah.
here's a question, and if those viewers that are watching, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them. We're focused,
Hmm.
like I said, primarily on. I'll just pull this off. This is our topic today. Just for those who've jumped in a little bit late, it's all about visa refusals, and the Chinook system is the system that in some locations the government the immigration department is using to bulk process because of the high volumes is one of the rationales, trying to figure out a way to be more efficient. And what we're addressing here is how that desire for efficiency can, it comes at a cost. And
For
so
sure.
I'll just pull up here once again, Nessa's question here. And she says, I know someone who applied 3 times for their study
Thrice.
permit.
I love that
And
word thrice.
yeah, right. What a waste. But anyways,
Yeah.
got approved when she didn't include her family in the application. And now,
Hmm.
of course, this is kind of like listing your spouse as non-accompanying in an express entry application, and then after trying to add them in. Well, then they
Hmm.
lodge an application for their spouse and kids. How likely is the approval? So I don't know if
Hmm.
this person, Nessa, is actually came and landed as a study permit holder here, or whether they've got the study permit approved and now they're trying to do another one before the person's traveled. But I don't know. Like, obviously, we don't know the country. There's a lot we don't know about it. But generally
Hmm.
speaking, Will, what's your experience as being like this with the inclusion of family or choosing to leave them behind, which is horrible. I hate it.
I think the word that was gonna come out of my mouth was the word horrible. I think there's a system flaw where in order to allow someone to come as a temporary resident, they have to leave their family behind to show that the family isn't coming with them. I think I would suggest there's better ways of sort of asking for or ensuring compliance even when a family comes, and that family separation is itself a huge consequence and a huge has mental health, physical health, all sorts of health implications. um, I'm having the same struggle with my clients, right? Because both what they're telling in the community and what they recommend is, hey, you were refused the first time because you tried to all come in together. Why don't you leave someone out this time and say that they're going to stay, or that that's a tie for you to return. But then once you get approved, you've made one set of submissions on that earlier application. How is that story changing now, and how are you maintaining consistency, and how are you going to convince them now differently, right? Later in the open spousal or the open uh, study permit or whatever it might be that you're trying to apply for your a visitor record that you might be trying to apply. So it's a difficult question for sure. What is your
Yeah.
approach, Mark, for something like
Yeah.
this?
Well, obviously, yeah, it's so hard because the location, where you're
It does.
coming from, makes all the difference in the world. You
Yeah.
say you're applying for a study permit from the UK, you're a UK citizen, and you're coming to Canada.
Yeah.
Well,
Vespa.
I would never hesitate to include the whole family in the application. I wouldn't.
Absolutely.
And but
Yeah.
if you're coming from India, it's almost like a fatal flaw.
Hmm.
And obviously, you add as much. It's like a balance scale, right? And
Hmm.
so when you've got some factors that can lend towards a refusal, like including your family, if obviously that's something on the list that can lend an officer to think, well, you don't have a reason to go back. Well, if that's the case, then I will do everything in my power to make sure that I'm overloading the application with clear evidence showing that, look, I'm coming. Here is the programs that are similar in India, but they
Hmm.
just don't offer what this program does in Canada.
Exactly.
And I've got this offer letter from a company in India that says they will hire me because no one else here has this specific skill set or educational requirement. And so, I will actually pull up transcripts. I'll, and do those kinds of things to help to overcompensate for it. Things that I would never do in the context of someone coming from Australia or the UK, right?
Yeah.
And so like a visa exempt country. And so we see, so it's not easy.
Another thing for your listeners, and some of you may have read the articles, but I haven't really talked about it publicly too much either. But Vespa, right? Vespa, we've learned now, Vespa, it's not just a moped or a vehicle or whatever it might be. It's immigration's, another secret kind of internal only program to help those from visa exempt countries obtain study permits very easily and quickly with over 95% approval rate, as compared to programs such as SDS. So as Mark was saying, where the countries you're a citizen of and residents of are becoming increasingly, if not the primary, sorting between approval and refusal. And I think for applicants, what that means is, especially if you recognize that you have a difficult case, recognize that you don't have the best set of facts and you're coming from a country from high refusals, set realistic expectations about the process. Because some of these algorithms, you could hire the best lawyer in the world, but they can't write that you're from another country, or write that you're not that age, or that you're divorced, or whatever it might be that immigration is sorting by.
Absolutely. I'm just going to flip over here. And for those of you who are tuning in again, this is just my Immigration Nation playlist with all the awesome guests I've had. And on the whole study permit front and statistics and approval rates, we have to remind them about the video that I did with LJ. And so you guys will have to check this one out. And I'm sure we can get kind of a weird face on here, but that's not too bad. So Lou Jansen, he came and he joined me, and this was back May 21st. And so we talked about just the actual statistics that you guys were able to pull. And so you definitely want to go back and check out that one as well. There's a lot of really good insight on country, where you're coming from, and the approval ratings.
Yeah. I would actually want to throw a plug, because LJ is a co-host of mine on the IMLIGHT podcast, and we actually added a third co-host, Zainab Zaye. So we're starting a new season soon. It's going to be incredible. And thank you, Mark. Your mentorship for our own podcast has been incredible. We follow in your footsteps, definitely in the work we do. We're having a holiday special as well on the 16th of December. Our good friend Mario Bellissimo is going to come on and talk about AI and Chinook as well. So we're really looking forward to collaborating with you in the new year, because I think you have an amazing platform. I love your audience. I don't say this enough, but I get in my email so many times, the number one referral source is, I watched your video with Mark Holthe. And to be part of Big Brother's show and have all those folks find me afterwards, it brings the world around. So thank you.
When people are doing, like, this is the thing I want everyone to understand. Will, how much are we getting paid to do this video? Zero. How much have you been paid to put the blog posts up? And we'll give a shout out. If you want to get some more background information, go to Heron Law Offices and go and check out the post. And I'll put this in the description. This is an earlier one that Will did, just kind of breaking down, the litigation and how the whole, Chinook system, at least at that time, how it was viewed. So go over there and check that stuff out. And the reason that I love having you on and LJ and others, it's because it's not all about, aligning your practice with new clients. It's about making a difference in the world. It's about being an advocate, a true professional. And where money isn't the only thing driving what we do, right? We genuinely want to do things differently. So I've got no problems plugging you guys, and I'm so excited.
I appreciate that.
We're rare. Well, we are. Most lawyers don't think that there's any value in giving things away for free. They say if we're being paid for the knowledge that we have and experience, why would we give it away for free? Well, you and I both know why, but so
I'm all about problem prevention, and I think you're too. Like, how do we prevent? How do we avoid? Hey, Shireen's on. Hey, Shireen. Sorry, I love familiar names. I'm like, hey, Shireen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there? Oh, so there. We know it's
Yeah.
India and China. Well, I'll address Shireen's question, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit more.
Sure.
But
I didn't mean to kind of
actually,
jump in there on you.
no
Yeah.
worries. I think we also kind of went off on it, but I again, yeah, thank you so much, Mark. We love you at Imlight, and we invest time for community, and that's to avoid problems rather to have them on the back end. We don't want people to go
Exactly.
litigation. We don't want people spending their livelihoods chasing a dream. We want them to be able to facilitate it with simple steps and get everyone educated during the process. It's exciting and it's fun as well. Shireen, so Lou actually has a tweet. I don't know how many days ago, but he has a tweet with all the visa offices that use Module 3, which is the main decision-making function. It has a bunch of flags. It's got a blue background, so I'd recommend you step onto Lou's Twitter. And I think, but it is almost all the main offices, but not the ones in the global north. So, for example, we know the United States doesn't use Chinook. I think I don't know if you saw this quote, Mark, but one of the reasons why they're not using Chinook is they said that it doesn't suit itself because it's not that they're not homogenous applications that they're assessing, which suggests that there's a homogeneity to is that the right word, to folks from other countries.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of unfortunate. I shouldn't be laughing about it. I feel kind of bad about that. But yeah, we know it's used in Ankara. We know it's used in India. We know it's used in China. We know it's used in the Philippines. We know it's used in all the UAE. So, I mean, most of these offices are using the main functionalities, and then some of them are piloting other parts of it, like the pre-assessment. I actually want to share one thing with your listeners and viewers, Mark. If you want to pull that tweet again with the chain, there's one tweet in there that I think is very, very fascinating. This is the risk indicator.
This one here.
Yeah, hopefully if you still have it.
Yeah.
So if you want to go down a little bit more, not the Philippines one. What I was highlighting this tweet is that all of the countries and all of the information that's being cited, they're all folks from like Pakistan, Philippines, Nigeria, Trinidad, and like global South countries, right? So clearly they're not using the example of the Australia or the UK.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just from that training alone, you can kind of tell who this program is targeted at, right? You hear Guinea and Brazil and folks like that. Middle East as a region. Middle West region again. Just a little further down, there's one with the risk indicators. I think, and then age discrimination, which I'm actually working with a professor on, and I'm going to talk to her in a couple of days about risk discrimination. It's pretty fascinating stuff, or age discrimination. It's the risk indicator. This is the thing that I think is super cool. Yeah. So how the risk indicator, and this is, I believe, module 6 or 5. Mine's a little faded now, but essentially, I think it's 5. The risk indicator is where visa offices can include words or terms that give rise to the need for further review, that are a risk, so to speak, right? And local visa offices have the ability to submit a form. Essentially, it's almost like a registration form to register a term or an employer or something that they want to flag for their local offices. So this is an example of the instructions that are given to filter. So when you apply, it says, hey, please filter for this client COB, which means country of birth, right? I don't think it means anything else. Equals redacted. Of course, I want to know what that country is, but if that's an example, here are all the flags coming up, right?
Nigeria,
Middle East,
Middle East, all of these ones that you've
India,
identified.
Jamaica, Burma, Afghanistan, Brazil. And then if you go into like profession, then they have, your engineer, or even if you go to certain schools. So some of this stuff is powerful, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not that I'm recommending folks, put in different terms for what they actually do. If you're an engineer, you're an engineer. You should put that on your forms, right? But the fact that some of these words are triggering, because you're going to this school, it's triggering a challenge, a problem in your application. Those are things that, frankly, as an advisor, an immigration lawyer, unless I know the code or the behind the scenes, I really can't give you advice on how to avoid this. And that makes it really interesting when doing our work. We can spend hours, days, months carving the most perfect application. But if your application gets triggered because you're an engineer or because you're born in, Mozambique or something, then, unfortunately, there's not much we can do. And that makes it really humbling, I think, in our work, but also kind of infuriating to see like, hey, is there a way we can do this more transparently and accountably?
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, as I look at this, and so I put my old officer hat on, I can see them using this tool when they get a tip about a particular overseas agent,
Yep,
education agent or whatever, that
makes
has a
sense.
pattern of submitting fraudulent applications to a particular school. And then they use this to search all others and look for patterns and
Hmm.
comparisons. And, obviously someone, whoever created this, I think, and I'm trying to put myself in the perspective of immigration, right? The
Hmm.
reason they were doing it is they've got officers that are overwhelmed, processing times that are going
Hmm.
out of whack. You've got a government who expects a certain standard for processing. You've got
Yeah,
institutions, educational institutions, that expect the students to be able to come in a reasonable period
100%.
of time. And so you've got this crushing volume. And so they're thinking, okay, well, what can we do to try to sort through this, to cull it, and to,
Yeah,
like you said, to kind of almost categorize and profile and then batch people together. Because even from the very beginning, when I worked on the border,
yeah.
I had people like Jesus coming up to see their friend, and they truly
Hmm.
believed
Yeah,
they were Jesus. And
yeah,
and people would travel on buses and commercial carriers versus
yeah.
people traveling in their own vehicle. And we'd say, well, do you have funds to support yourself? And they'd say, well, no, my boyfriend,
Hmm.
girlfriend, they're going to take care of me. Okay, let's call the boyfriend, girlfriend. Oh, I had no clue this person was coming. And this is like the early 2000s, when the idea of dating online was still a novel thing. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, someone comes and they fit this profile, instantly referred up to secondary examination, like if you're on the
exactly.
pill line. And
Yeah,
so, so I can see what they're trying
the
to do here.
foundations. Yeah.
But at the same time, the problem that I have is when you batch and you put people together with these similar kind of features, the officers are not allowed to do exactly what you've mentioned. Look at the context and look at the entire
Hmm.
picture and make a decision based on that, because not two
Yeah.
no two people are the same.
Yeah.
So
I think the system doesn't support it. I think they can. I think they can access the documents. And in some cases they are good decisions and you're like, they definitely read this stuff. But, the problem is it's not like the front filter anymore. And to go to your point, I mean, I am, a very vocal critic of Chinook. But
mhm.
if I think about it and I think about my own practices as a firm and many other, I'm not perfect either. But if I have 30 inquiries or 40 inquiries in a day, which I mean, there's hundreds of thousands going to immigration, right? We have this major backlog of millions. So, and they're required to process thousands of applications at a time. I mean, we can do a couple at a time to do a really good job. Who am I choosing to work with out of
Yeah,
the list? Whoever, I'm probably doing the same filtering based on probably biases. Hey, has a client like this worked in the past? And is this a matter I know? Or, what is their tech savviness so I can actually
mhm.
facilitate this particular work? How long will it take
Absolutely.
for me to do this?
Yep.
So, I mean, I think there's part of it that's inevitable, and that is the future, and that is the volume question. But I think the other problem question is how do we interact or create a more transparent system, or at least come to some agreement on the level of transparency so that we don't find out about these programs when they're jammed in through litigation or that just like out of nowhere from I don't even think the way that this is being produced via myself and colleagues having to
Yep.
release these eight tips is the
Yeah.
right way for a
No.
program of this nature, of this importance, to be shared with the public,
Yeah.
right? Or come to
I,
public attention. So
I
those
agree.
are, I think, are
Mhm.
starting points.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think for as long as I can remember, and immigration, they have taken significant steps, IRCC compared to CBSA, in their willingness to be transparent with their program delivery instructions and things like
Hmm.
that, so that we as individuals can actually see the process in which an officer goes, the process they follow when they're making a decision, the things that they look at. And I think that it just lends itself to better quality applications. And sometimes I think when they are secretive about this, they feel that if individuals know about it, that somehow the bad actors are going to use that information to game the system somehow. And
Hmm.
or if
Hmm.
they know the keywords, or the way that they view things really deep down from an adjudication process, that somehow they're going to just become better at
Hmm.
misrepresentation and not getting
Mhm,
caught.
mhm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
but it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Like I look at even what happened on the borders,
Yeah.
when the CBSA officers were using basically their bulletins, their directives on who could
Mm-hmm.
come in and who couldn't. And
Mm-hmm.
boy, if us as council knew what they viewed to be an essential purpose or non-essential, we could advise people before they ever got on the plane, right? And in
Exactly.
a way, I see this as well with this whole process, and even Chinook and how they're adjudicating these. If they were
Yeah.
more transparent with the decision making that they were going through,
Yeah.
that I think council and representatives would say, look, your chances of approval are very low because of this.
Exactly.
And these are the
Yeah.
factors that they're actually relying upon versus
Exactly.
just guesswork and frustration and all of this angst. So I agree. I
Yeah.
agree 100% with you.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, we've seen sort of the fallout of this, and when it combines with an issue for the francophone students in Quebec, you saw a
Mm-hmm.
huge backlash. It made it to the House of Commons. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
comments that Lou and colleagues made because they were trying to speak out and stuff we flagged immigration a long time ago that when you have systems like this, you have to explain, because if you don't explain it, people are going to draw ties. Everything is Chinook now. I have people who refuse spousal sponsorships who are like, it's Chinook, right? And we
I
know that
know.
Chinook's not being
Yeah.
used in that right now, right? So
Yeah.
I think if you get ahead of it and if you communicate with your stakeholders and build a program properly, have maybe an independent advisory board. If I was advising Minister Fraser now, I'd say, hey, just get an expert advisory board. Make sure that whatever systems are being used are vetted through that.
Yep.
Stuff like that. Little steps could go a long way, right? So.
Exactly.
Oh,
And
and
I'll
then
just
choose
I'll
that
just put
question.
this one
Yeah.
up here. So here's the question, right? Chinook
Mhm.
only used for study permits, right? This is a fair question. People don't even
Yeah.
really know entirely which program, where it's being used, all those kinds of things. And so
Yeah.
what are your, like they're asking even within
Yeah.
the context of PR. And I think at this stage we can
Yeah.
probably, well, I don't know. Like, is there elements of this that they're using for express entry? I know,
I think
Mario
they
is
have
probably
other
going to talk
names.
about that.
I know, yeah. I'm excited to talk to Mario about some of this, because I think there's other names of programs such as Horizon and things that we're still learning that are visa office specific. But from what we know, it's temporary residence files, so visitor, student, worker, and then you have your added layer in India and China where they have artificial intelligence and they've well publicized their development and building up of these AI systems. So for TRVs in India and China, they are also utilizing they're using artificial intelligence. What's not entirely clear now are how those two systems meet each other, and that's, I think, where we're trying to explore the next generation. Because if India and China, the AI becomes the norm, a computer system, automatically sort of recommending the approvals on a bunch of people, and then the second tier, third tier get the closer look. How does that feed into Chinook, which does sort of the similar thing at the back end of saying, hey, based on this information and our historical trends, we can bulk refuse 50 or 100 or 200 of you with one click of the mouse, right? And it's going to be interesting to see how those two worlds collide.
Very, very much so. Nessa followed up here, just confirming that no, she hasn't traveled yet. So school starts summer 2022 and they've applied for the open work permit. So this is after it's been issued and now they're applying. And this is, I think, Nessa, it's going to be tough, right? To get the accompanying dependents approved. What were the reasons for the first two refusals? This is the three refusals, Will, if you remember. She said on the third it was approved. And so, yeah, it's going to be tough, Nessa. Yeah. It's kind of, in a way, I like to liken a lot of things back to express entry, but it's kind of like listing your spouse as non-accompanying and then deciding you want to switch and add them. There was a time in the early days of express entry where you could do that. It was a loophole and they wouldn't reassess CRS. But you know what? I could see, in this case, they're trying to use this loophole to get the study permit approved first, and then slide back and reapply again for the open work permit and stuff for the kids. So I don't know. I think it's I think they're going to have a hard time. Well,
I think immigration should put some guidance on this because number one, we know at the back end, family separation is causing harm to applicants. Number two, there's just so many creative ways. I've recently learned of this process. I don't know if you saw this, Mark, as well. It's going on in forums and stuff, but two applicants that are spouses are both non-accompanying of each other applying for their separate study permits or something of that nature.
Mhm.
Really, like stuff that kind of boggles the mind, but it's like
Yeah.
what they've tried to do to avoid having their applications being viewed together as a family, because if that's
Yep.
viewed as a family, then they're not going to leave, and that there's family ties. Just something's wrong with that system and that way of classification. So I hope there are some fixes
Yep.
and maybe some program delivery instructions being like, hey, here's what you need to prove to show dual intention properly, or if you come to Canada, here's a way you can sort of pre show your compliance in some sense. A list. I hope in the future there's a way of that.
Excellent. I'll pull this one up. This is something I know that I have not done a lot of, and that's recognizing
Candy.
the territory. And so Candy here, I always have
That's
my
Candy.
guests say where they're tuning in from. And so I just thought I'd give Candy a shout out here. Treaty Four
Andy
Lands with
is a team member, and I also sorry, in my haste I forgot to recognize that I'm speaking from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and the Kaikat nations here in Burnaby/New West in Vancouver, the Greater Vancouver region. But thank you, Candy. Candy, for all those who don't know, Candy is a case manager with us, recently minted RCIC, but she's shooting above her weight already.
yeah,
Many years above her call in the
awesome.
RCIC world, and really the future of collaboration between consultants and lawyers. I know that's a topic for another day probably, but
Yeah,
someone I really lean on for all my immigration work. So get to
awesome.
know Candy.
That is so cool. Interesting. Well, my kids are Métis. So
Yeah.
there's two lines that come from through my wife's side through the Red River settlement in Winnipeg, and so we were tracing them back just last night, and yeah, there's two separate lines.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's cool, really cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. I'm going to get to another question, and let's see. And I know lots of people ask, "Hey, am I eligible?" So, okay, let's see what else can see. She's doing a good job. Look at that. See, she's posting our handles for Twitter. That's fantastic, Candy. Thank you for doing
Thank
that.
you, Candy. Thank you.
Okay. Here's, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but Hardy says, is there a special reason that IRCC keeps so close to the chest their methods in assessing candidates? Kind of seems like they want more people to be out of the loop.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the big question. I think down the road though, I mean, privacy and public interest and efficiency and transparency and details and process. There is a clash between the two. I mean, in an ideal world, I'm going to try and think of a way that they can be bridged, but in order to make quicker decisions, in order to process more, you're probably going to have to spend less time on applications, and you're probably going to have to ignore some stuff to get to somewhere, right? And or do things like this where tech kind of helps sort and bring people of the same age or country or whatever it might be together, so that you can render, refuse, click, 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 and it all goes in without what they had to do before, which is go through each GCMS page and open up the separate documents, and it was taking too long for decisions. I still think though there's somewhere a middle ground there
There's
to
a
be
balance.
sought.
Yeah.
There's a balance to be sought.
Yeah.
There's a way, and maybe it is, like I said, discouraging certain applicants just by saying, listen, it's because, I mean, the problem is it does really, you start verging on the bias and discrimination, things that are historically embedded. So you have to sort of deal with that laundry first. A lot of dirty laundry there. But, eventually you're going to have to justify, say, hey, listen, with this profile, you probably shouldn't be applying for a study permit. And it's just not going to be a good investment of your money to the institution or to immigration. There probably needs to be a better way for you, or maybe unfortunately at this time it just doesn't work out. But I'm someone who likes to be direct. I'd like to tell
Yep.
someone to tell me, hey, this is not for you. This category is not for you. The problem is the why. How would you justify the why, and how would you present that why?
Yep. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, Candy, you bet. She says, thanks for the 5 minutes of fame. You bet.
You're welcome, Candy. Thank you for your help always. And yeah, Since Marco, the previous minister.
Yes. So
Yeah.
he's saying here, Gershon is saying, since Minister Mendicino, the previous minister, suggested to revamp the immigration system, it does look like in order to meet the projected numbers for immigrants, Chinook might be the answer. And obviously they're processing in high volumes. They're looking at all kinds of creative ways, Gershon.
Mhm.
I think both Will and I are on the side, like we understand the dilemma that immigration has. We understand it. But the biggest failing, and we see it all the time, is just a lack of transparency. Like it just, to me, it makes no sense. Like, cause sometimes in many instances, Will and I are both members of the Canadian Bar Association. We consult with immigration all the time on different things that they're doing. And, we can be a part of the solution too. We
Yep.
can work with them. And if they are experiencing issues, then maybe there's things that we can do on our side with our clients. And I know that CAPIC and, the other consultant organizations, and Acadie, all of us, we want to be a part of the solution. We don't want to be just have our sole purpose is trying to make their lives difficult. Like, we can appreciate
That's
the
clear.
challenging tasks that they have, but we just want transparency. And they'd be surprised how many of the problems that they're facing would, suggestions can be put forward by us to help in, as a
Mhm.
partner in this process to help them get through these challenging times. And that's, I think, the biggest failing that I have, that I see,
Mhm.
Will.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I completely agree, and it's been 3 years now. There's 3 years worth of investments, millions of dollars, third parties involved. It's not going away, right? But I think if in 2018, when they started developing it, and certain visa officers, experts in their respective right, were meeting about this, it could have been something that say, hey, can we pass it by our legal team, or does our outreach officer? Can we gather a group of folks from the CBA, from these different organizations, and we do write. I mean, again, another sort of donation of our time is, and I've been part of several really good ones, is to write positions and make recommendations and to make suggestions. And again, someone probably back in 2018 could have said, hey, because you're implementing these things that are filtering based on age, gender, country of citizenship and residence and those things, maybe we need to revisit how some of those filters occur, or messaging around them, or reasons why we're doing certain things. Marital status, for example, a lot of the inputs are based on years of data that could be from times past of Canada. How do we modernize some of that back end data? I'm sure we would have been very engaged in that conversation, but to find out
Absolutely.
through Okrin and through court and through
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Rumor
leaves a bit of a
and
sour
yeah.
taste
Yeah.
in the mouth for
Yeah.
sure.
And then you get lots of misinformation like this, like Janik. I thought tier to
Yeah,
peer pathways processed by Chinook, because that program doesn't have restrictions for overseas dependents, right?
yeah,
Like it's completely, yeah. And then Eduarda comes back and she says about the SDS, and just so that
yeah,
everyone who's not applying for a study permit, the student direct stream, this SDS, she says Chinook is also used for that. How they even choose
yes.
the countries in the list, right?
Well,
So
all countries have accessibility to the Chinook system, and it's up to them to decide what modules and what functions they want to use. And some offices, because there's not enough volume, aren't just using the tool outright. They're just still in traditional. I mean, if you don't have that many applications, think about yourself. If you have 5 applicants for a job, you can take time to look at each one of them. If you have 500, you're probably not going to look at and read through each one. Very, very similar type parallels drawn, right? So,
yeah,
yeah, I Chinook is being used for that. But for the TR to PR, I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, I think that Janek's comment really emphasizes that. When I started the Chinook research, and when I was sort of one of the first ones to sort of bring it to the public, you couldn't even Google search the term, right? Your video was probably
mm-hmm.
one of the first Google searches of the term
Yep,
that occurred. Like, Chinook was not coming up because it was just erased and removed from any sort of public facing immigration website.
yeah,
So I think that that's something that we need to um, and remedy. And now when you search up Chinook, I'm sure from the immigration side, they're not happy that the first thing they see is our videos, and maybe me being a little bit critical in some pieces. But that's what happens when
yeah,
you don't, put it out first,
absolutely,
right? So.
yeah. And so, what narrative do you want, government? Right?
Mhm, mhm,
Do you want the
mhm.
narrative of secrecy and mysterious and somewhat unfair, adjudication of applications, which that's how we feel right now, right? Or do you want to come forward and explain it? And the officers in their mind, they have to understand that we see things on the ground. We see
Hmm.
things from the perspective of our clients that are applying. They see things from the perspective of their officers in the visa offices who are struggling to process. And
Exactly.
unless we communicate, then these misconceptions and whoever has the largest YouTube channel, I guess, gets to define that narrative, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's
But you know what?
awesome. Well,
On the
mhm,
positive side, we've brought a lot of people out of Chinook through the courts and through, reapplications, because we know how Chinook works a little bit more. We know what they're looking at, what it's triggering, and sometimes in my submissions, I'm even dropping a little bit of a hint that, hey, this, please do not Chinook this. Like, can
yeah,
an officer please properly read this? We addressed this in our
yeah,
last application. You do not look at the evidence. Maybe there is a combination of words or specific folks who are representatives. Like you said, they can trigger bad representatives. Presumably down the road, they can trigger good ones too, right? And
yep,
I
yep,
mean, there's pros and cons to that. I just think that, like you said, transparency would
yeah.
go a long
And
way.
you also brought something up, Will, which I think is very, very valuable. If they have the ability to search, right, by
Hmm.
terms, there is no reason for any representative out there who does not follow good practices, who counsels misrepresentation or anything like that. It is extremely easy for them to identify you and flag you on all of your applications. And so I
Hmm.
know you probably feel the same way I do, Will, but I would love every single representative out there that is a shyster, that exploits people, that takes advantage of them. I would love for them to be barred and blocked, you know, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
it can be a real seedy world that we're in when, and
Yeah.
let's face it, individuals in a foreign country who have very few options, the
Hmm.
consequences of misrepresenting are very, very low. Because
Yeah.
if you submit all of the, or identify all of the lack of evidence you have to support your application, it's going to get refused. And when you have people who then produce documentation that's not genuine, well, it gets refused and they're barred from Canada for 5 years. Well, they weren't coming anyways. And that's the horrible scenario that we're in. And that's why we see so much fraud that exists in many countries. And it's real. It's
Hmm.
real. And then you've got, then you've got this situation where the people that are trying to do it right, the people that are genuine, they get themselves caught in these grouped
Hmm.
categories, right? Well,
Hmm.
and so yeah, these are realities that everybody's dealing with right now.
I would agree with most of what you said. The one thing I would push back on is still that the consequences of misrepresentation are still very
Yeah,
high, and I think it may
yeah,
be underappreciated and maybe sold on like, hey,
yeah,
you have no chance, therefore you have to do this in
yeah.
order to get
Fair
in, and
enough.
this
Yeah,
is how it works. But the reality is one of those refusals, and how much even folks are paying locally for these shysters to try and
yeah,
you know submit these applications. The amount of money, the amount of put into it, it's having huge detrimental
yeah.
impacts,
Yeah. And
and
you're
things
right,
that we
Will.
have
And
to
I
do.
have to be careful with how I use my words because it's more of this perception that I get from people who are willing to do anything to be able to come to Canada. And absolutely, never is there a situation where there are no consequences. That's that's not the case.
Hmm.
A 5-year bar effectively is a lifetime bar.
Yeah.
When you get that and then you try to come back again another time, that will haunt you forever. And your
And other
circumstances
countries
in
you
your
want to go
country,
to.
yeah,
Exactly. So
yeah, your and search situations might change, circumstances may change, and an opportunity may come up at a later day. And we see that a lot with applicants who go through the US. I see a lot of those students who get OPT status on, through
mhm,
these shyster organizations who create fake job offers for them so that they can remain, and then eventually it comes back to haunt them when the
mhm,
US figures out that these entities are fraudulent, and then they very easily trace back, and then that person's dream of remaining in the US, or even to some extent it can impact on their visas in any country that is asking, have
mhm.
you had a prior visa refused? So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
and and to give I've been a little bit hard on immigration, but the one positive things about some of the new portals they're creating is I am seeing that back end, which I thought was should have been there a long time ago, where when you create an account for a client, they ask for their email as well, so it gets everyone on the same page. They're seeing what you're
Yeah,
seeing, so things that like that I think are a positive step forward, so there's less of that someone submitting on your behalf without you having seen anything. I think
yes,
that's one of the
yeah,
most problematic practices in immigration, when someone applies for you and you don't even know what they've submitted to immigration.
right,
That's
yeah, that's just, yeah,
hugely
horrible.
problematic.
Horrible. Well, thank you so much, Will. This was great. I really, really appreciate you joining, and we'll slide over here. This is Will's site. Make sure you head over here and you click on the consultation right here, and book a consult with Will or a member of his team if you have any questions. And obviously, this world of visa refusals. Jump back here to us here. The the world of visa refusals is a reality. And the more you can educate yourself, the more you can understand how the process works, the better you're going to be able to present the genuine information that really should be used to support an approval. And I find, just in closing, that many people would have had their applications approved if they just addressed things that we've talked about today. And my job, I always see that as to reducing the officer's discretion down to nothing. So I close off every loop. I provide answers to every question, even before the officer asks the question. And in the end, there's one decision to be made, and that's an approval, because the client fully qualifies. So, all right. Any last words before we sign off here, Will?
No. Thank you, Mark. Enjoy the winter break. I hope you get a little bit of one with your family. And I'm excited for 2022. I've been exhausted by 2021, but I think next year we'll do a lot of thinking and some more writing, more advocacy, more dreaming, and hopefully some more work on behalf of all of you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Remember, as always, we've now got 2 Q&As going Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. right here on the Canadian Immigration Institute, which is broadcast to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube right here on the channel. I go Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Alicia is at 11 a.m. As soon as we get her software set up, then I'm going to turn her loose to do her own Q&A. And watch for the upcoming video that Chanel Rosenbaum, our newest lawyer, is going to do with me on the whole seedy world of recruitment. All right, guys, take care. Thanks, Will. See you later.